Welcome to the leadership module of the RSO training. As a reminder, this presentation and other helpful information can be found on the Involvement Center. Let's first look at a quote from best-selling author and leadership expert Simon Sinek. "The courage of leadership is giving others the chance to succeed, even though you bear the responsibility for getting things done." And I really like this quote because I think it highlights the responsibility that RSO leaders are put in, both for the organization and the responsibility also to give others the chance to succeed, right? Organizations are made up of their followers, and you kind of fall under that responsibility of encouraging them and guiding them throughout the whole leadership process. Okay, so what is leadership? Some view leadership as an ability, right? That a person who has the leadership ability is able to be a leader. They have the capacity to lead. This can often assume that capacity is natural, but that capacity can also be acquired over time, right? Others view it as a behavior, right? So like how a leader may act. Some view it as a relationship, right? The back and forth between leaders and followers. This requires leaders to include followers and their interests in the process. Some view it as a skill, right? That the competencies that develop to accomplish tasks effectively. When viewing leadership in this light, that tends to allow for leadership to be learned, right? Like any other skill. And finally, some people think of leadership as an influence process, right? That leaders direct attention to influencing others to achieve a common goal. And this should be the goal of all leaders, right? Okay, so why is leadership so hard to define, right? Why did I go over a couple different views of leadership? Well, it's because everyone looks at leadership differently, right? Leadership is often viewed in a personal light, which is biased towards your views towards society. And that definition of leadership has evolved over time, right, to meet the needs of different people, cultural norms, different positions of power, and the leadership role itself, right? Essentially, leadership is unique to each person, and everyone will ultimately develop a definition of leadership that fits with who they are and what they want to accomplish. It may look different from RSO to RSO, from president to president, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, even though it's hard to define, we know good leadership when we see it working well. The definition of leadership that our office looks at is leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. Let's look at a couple things within that definition, right? The first point I'd like to highlight is that leadership is a process, so not a trait or characteristic that I had maybe discussed earlier, but that it resides in an individual rather than a relationship between leaders and followers, right? So both leaders and followers are affected by each other. When viewing leadership as a process, right, it becomes available to everyone, right? That no one is born a leader, but that leadership can be developed over time throughout the process of the relationship. Additionally, leadership involves influence. Without influence, leadership doesn't exist. And same thing for leadership occurs in groups, right? Without people, leadership doesn't exist either. So those groups can be small group projects, taking the lead there. And they can be RSOs, like in this example, or larger companies and organizations. And then finally, leadership includes attention to common goals, right? And this really highlights the need for a mutual purpose between leaders and followers, right? Leaders must tend to the goals of the followers, not just what the leader wants. Okay, now let's take a look at leadership versus management. These two words are commonly used interchangeably, but there are some key distinctions and similarities. So on the left, we've got a picture of leadership, right? The person holding the yellow flag, taking the lead and walking with their followers. And then on the right, we've got the leader holding the pointing stick, right, towards a presentation, and then it looks like the rest of the group is there taking notes on their laptops. So I will highlight that leadership and management are similar, right? They both involve influence, right? The person with the flag, the person with the pointer. They're both working with groups and looking to effectively complete some sort of accomplishment, some sort of mutual goal from what it looks like. However, they differ in a couple different ways. So management is often seen to provide order and consistency to organizations, whereas leadership is sought to produce change and movement. Additionally, management is about seeking order and stability, whereas leadership is about seeking adaptive and constructive change. It's important to note, too, that you need both strong leadership and management within the organization for it to succeed and thrive. If an organization has strong management without leadership, right, that can often look like outcomes can become stifling or maybe bureaucratic. Whereas conversely, if an organization has strong leadership without management, outcomes can become meaningless or misdirected or maybe like change for change's sake, right? There's a need for both leadership and management within your organizations. But for the sake of this video, we'll talk about both a little bit, and I may use the terms interchangeably, but there are some key distinctions. Okay. Moving past a lot of the philosophical leadership things, let's talk about followers, right? Followers are what make organizations happen. Think about your experience as a follower, right, in your organizations and the role of advocating for change to leadership, right? Some questions to consider for your organization, maybe stepping into this leadership position for the first time. Like, who are your members? Are they just UNLV students? Is it the broader community that you're looking to serve? And then how do you center the efforts of those members around serving these followers, right? So really thinking about maybe your time as a follower, as a general member, maybe of the organization, and thinking about the needs of those folks as you're leading the organization. It's really important to not lose sight of that as you move up in an organization. Right. Another huge component of leadership is inspiring a shared vision. Leaders look towards the future, right? You're looking to write the path for the next year and the year after that in your RSO. And in doing so, right, leaders are responsible for getting followers to be excited about new possibilities, right? They enlist the others in building common ground for that shared vision, right? Like sitting down and actually chatting with your general members and hearing what their vision for the organization is. Sometimes I think it can be lost within the leadership group about where the whole organization thinks it's moving. They ask what makes us unique in their vision, right? And they regularly connect the work to the organization back to that vision. And then I like this quote, leadership is the capacity to translate that vision into reality, right? So gaining that capacity from your followers, really setting to lead the vision and then putting that vision into a reality, right? Okay, so now that you've inspired a shared vision, right, how do you translate that vision into a reality? Well, it's through empowering others, right? Empowerment is a means to include the team in the decision making. Individuals get to use their own expertise and judgment for the betterment of the organization, right? Creates buy-in within the organization. That's an issue that we commonly see student organization leaders come to our office with, that they struggle maybe to create buy-in within their organization and their executive board members or their general members. But creating that empowerment is so powerful, right? And empowering leaders, I like to highlight, don't micromanage. Maybe they get that shared vision from the group, and then they empower others to make that vision their reality to an extent. It doesn't mean that empowering leaders don't oversee, but I think it's important to not micromanage there and give that valuable experience to executive board members or general members as well. An important distinction here in leadership and management, right, is goal setting. I'm sure you've all heard of SMART goals. Where the acronym SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. And these are all different components that should be, incorporated into your goal setting. And as you think about goal setting, right, I think it's important to think both at an organization level and a program-specific level. So, if you're starting new in this leadership position, spending some time with your executive board member to set out some organizational goals for both the semester and maybe the year, the short term, the long term. How do you plan to recruit new members? Who is going to be in charge or leading that process? And then how will we make the UNLV community better through your RSO, right? And then in terms of some program-specific goals, think it's things to consider. How are you maybe creating new events or initiatives or improving upon existing traditions and events? And I think this is something that we see often in student organizations as well, right? Is there's this degree of like, we need to follow the status quo, right? We did this last year and it worked well, and we're going to continue to do that this year. I would encourage you to avoid thinking down that train of thought that can maybe sometimes like stifle innovation and really can force organizations to like stagnate a little bit, and it becomes difficult, right? Thinking outside the box and trying something new. But I think often there's a lot of value there for student organizations, both in empowering others, setting some of those goals, creating those new initiatives. That's not to say that you can't maintain existing traditions and events, but look to continue to improve them year on year. And this process, right, can shake up and breathe new life into your team members at times, right? Delegate. Delegate, delegate, delegate. I'm going to say it a couple of times, right? This is so important for student organization leaders. Being a leader does not mean that you do everything, right? You're not alone within your leadership team, within your executive board member. And it's the most common feedback that we hear from struggling student leaders is that they're overwhelmed by how much work there is to do to run an organization. Some things to consider in terms of examples of things you can delegate. You can delegate creating agendas, making room reservations, scheduling tabling opportunities. I'm not going to read out this full list, but you're welcome to pause or screenshot. These are all great opportunities, right, for you to empower your leadership teams, your general members to help out, take some of that weight off of your plate. And right, like I said before, it helps to create that buy-in within the group. Is offering them work and things to do as well. And right, think about strengths and interests when delegating. Don't just blindly pass out the social media to someone who's not very active on social media. Think about those strengths and interests and ask your teams what they are excited and interested in working on. Another thing to consider when leading your organization is to manage healthy conflict. I like to remind student organization leaders that in your semester, year, or longer that you're leading in your leadership position, that conflict is bound to happen and it's unavoidable, but as long as it's managed properly and that the conflict is healthy in nature, it can really push the organization to grow and learn from and move forward from conflict, right? And some things to consider when navigating conflict would encourage members to be open and honest in their communications, right? Disagree with the idea or the premise, don't disagree with the person, right? And when, engaging in the conflict, prioritize that in-person or video communication, right? It's sometimes hard to judge the tone of a text or email or GroupMe conversations. I like to just, call the person up on the phone, or if you're both on campus, just, get to the bottom of it, make sure, right, that the conflict is at the center of the conversation, not the individuals, right? Put that besides yourselves. Right, put the success of the organization over personal interests. And then, if you can't be impartial, if there's really a struggle that the organization is facing, reach out to our office. We're always happy to support as a mediator or, offer another perspective. Would encourage you to use your advisor, right, in navigating conflict as well. They're there to support you. And this is a great example of an opportunity where they can maybe look at the conflict from an unbiased lens. Great. Another thing to consider in leading your student organizations is the importance of valuing diverse opinions, right? Hopefully you've already gotten a chance to look at the diversity and inclusion module and how important navigating diverse perspectives, identities is in building inclusive organizations. But just to rehash a couple of those things, organizations are at their strongest when everyone comes from a diverse set of lived experiences and viewpoints, right? You're not missing out on specific things because groups of folks are all coming from the same space or lived experience. And as you manage, those conflicts, or as you manage different perspectives, it's important to, just because you maybe don't understand someone's perspective doesn't make it invalid by any means. Right. It also important to highlight that everyone's ideas deserves to be valued, respected, and supported. And as leaders, you set the standard, right, of respecting others' viewpoints. As I mentioned earlier, not like disagreeing with the individual, but like disagreeing with the idea, the concept in general, right? That viewpoints are not stifled in conflict, and that you are really valuing diverse perspective as you lead. Some other things to consider, and our office, student involvement activities, supports students and student organizations through a handful of these different workshops each year. Last year we did a how to run a meeting, as well as some like Robert's Rules of Order practices. Project management is another really important thing that leaders need to and will get the opportunity to manage throughout their time. Setting priorities when there are so many different competing priorities and interests. Fostering the strengths of others, setting clear and open lines of communications, and then ultimately respecting and holding others accountable, respectfully holding others accountable. Okay, the last little portion of this video I'd like to highlight the importance of working with your advisor, right? Every advisor is unique and maybe has a different style for advising organizations, but really work with your advisor to figure out what that style is, figure out what those expectations are. It's important to like communicate with them clearly in a timely manner and fairly often, right? Establishing those expectations at the beginning of what communication looks like. And remember too that advisors are there to support you and challenge you, right? Offer a perspective, but also push the organization to be better. And so if that challenge maybe is off-putting, know that it comes out of ultimately a true meaning of support in most instances, right? Respect their boundaries, understand their boundaries, right? That goes back to the expectation setting, and lean into their strengths and expertises, right? So if your organization is an organization housed in an academic department or college, right? Lean into their expertise as a faculty member and their connections or maybe their research interests, and really look into how you can best work with your advisor, understanding who they are on campus. As for expectation setting, I spoke a little bit about that, but really from the beginning, you should be establishing like what meetings, events, or programs do you think it's important for them to attend, and they'll have their own expectation for that as well, and make sure you find that common ground. Be sure to check in with how involved that they plan to be in terms of leadership or membership meetings. Best form of communication, right? Is it over email, or do you set up a once a month in-person meeting? How is that communication going to be fostered? Important too to like really let them know, how do you like to be supported? How do you wish to receive feedback? Is that in the meeting itself? Is that after the meeting? Is that one-on-one? And what does that look like for you? And then what does your advisor expect from you and other leaders in your organization? Is it a monthly report or a bi-weekly report? Some updates after bigger events? What does your advisor expect? And then what does a successful advising relation feel like from both sides, right? So lots of things to consider, and it's important, especially as you're stepping into the roles maybe for the first time, working with a new advisor maybe for the first time, to have these mutual expectation setting conversations regularly to ensure that you're both on the same page. Okay, wrapping us up with some reflection questions to consider as you move forward this year. Why is this organization important enough for you to put your time and energy into, right? What was the reason why you joined it or maybe stepped up into a leadership position? And I think it's important to like center that in your leadership, right? And to not lose sight of it. Sometimes the work can be difficult, the hours can be time consuming or draining, but don't forget that why you joined or why you're so passionate about it. Also, consider what kind of leader do you want to be? How will you use your experience as an RSO leader to reach that vision, right? You've gotten some experience looking at past leaders. You've got this brand new opportunity maybe to take that step and to be the leader that you want to be. How do you anticipate that showing up, and how will you reach that vision? And then, right, like I just mentioned, think of the leaders who have most inspired you. What can you learn from them, and how can you incorporate those lessons into your own unique style? And then finally, how will you center the needs of your organization and your role, right? Not just thinking about yourself and your goals, but the goals of the organization, the goals of the general member, the full executive board team, finally, just some resources to wrap us up. Use your advisor. They are an expert. They are on campus for a reason, and they're there to support you, and they want to support you. Our office, Student Involvement in Activities, is always happy to meet with RSOs. Like I said before, if you've got some conflicts that you're working through or a unique problem situation that you want another perspective in, always happy to support organizations. Don't hesitate to reach out. I mentioned some workshops. We'll plan to have a couple more this semester and in the spring. If any of those topic areas interest you, come learn from experts on campus, from some of our Student Involvement and Activities staff. And then another great office and resource is the Service Learning and Leadership Office. They host leadership lunches once a month, snacks and skills opportunities for student leaders to develop some different skill sets, as well as the Catalyst Conference, which is a one-day leadership conference in October on Friday, October 6th. That'll be a great opportunities for students to really reflect in on some of the different leadership skills, their strengths, their weaknesses. And then finally, they also offer a LEAD certificate program, which is a co-curricular certificate program where students have the opportunity to tell their leadership story as they complete a range of different campus leadership development experiences. But that concludes the leadership module of the RSO training. Thanks so much.